regularly fall asleep during worship like every week.
I tithed for the first time and it was super hard. Like, why am I wasting this money? I don't want this money to be used for things I don't want.
Our lukewarmness actually also comes from just being so stuck in these fears, these anxieties that keep us focused on the wrong things. Hey friends, thanks so much for being here. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to make sure to remind you wherever you're tuning in from, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, to hit that subscribe button, that notification bell, because that is the best way for you to not miss new content that we're coming out with to help you live an authentic, free, thriving, holistic life through God's perspective. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and let's dive in.
Today, we are going to unpack something that we are super passionate about, and it's honestly like a holy discontent for us. And if you can see in the video title, the audio title, wherever you are, we are going to really unpack and discuss lukewarm Christianity.
Juicy.
And this is super juicy because we feel like the body of Christ, especially in America, is falling into a state of lukewarm Christianity. It feels like we're doing all the right things for the most part, but we feel like something is still missing. There's just something more. And we almost feel like it almost feels like a plateau. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we really don't like seeing our brothers and sisters fall into this steady state, lukewarm Christianity. And we're going to unpack all of this of what it looks like, what you can do about it, all the practicals. But I want to...
Can I just caveat and say we're not perfect either? We're not here like saying we're perfect Christians or anything. It's just, I think it's an area that both of us, because we're so aware, it's so easy to fall into. It's like constantly on top of our minds. Like, how do we avoid being lukewarm? How do we, or if we are in lukewarm seasons, how do we still stay faithful and still, pursue God and experience God? But yeah, we're not here trying to say we know all the answers.
Yeah, we definitely don't.
But we'll share like what we've learned and what has helped us. So.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So let's jump into it. So Jesus addresses this directly in Revelation 3:16, and he says, "I know your works. You're neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot." This is so like so it doesn't even sound like the way I speak. But this is the Bible. "So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth." How would you like to be spat out of Jesus's mouth?
Jeez.
That's harsh.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty intense, but it's what the Bible says, so don't blame us. It's blame God. So basically, what he's calling us is not a casual kind of faith, but he's inviting us to go all into God, into this life of faith, and be transformed through him. So we're going to talk a little bit about why lukewarm Christianity is so common, especially in America. We can only speak for America because we're Americans and we live in America, but I honestly think it might be just all across the world. Yeah. It's just human nature. So why don't you...
I think it does appear in different forms throughout the world, but I have seen and read, and like my personal opinion is I think it's especially true and prevalent in America and Western Christianity, because when you are so used to a certain way of like living or people talking about things, you almost take it for granted, like that's why there's like that stereotype in like the Bible Belt, everyone's a Christian, they all go to church, but like who actually is following God with their lives, versus countries where it's illegal to be Christian, or you could go to jail or be persecuted for your faith. And actually we see a lot of more like passionate, on fire, just like people who are so zealous for God in those areas, because it's not so common, it's not so cushy, and they travel for miles and miles just to go to like a church gathering, versus in America it's like, oh, I'm tired on Sunday, like I'll just watch online. No offense to people who do watch online, but you know what I mean.
We do encourage you to gather in person.
Yeah, that's another topic.
Yeah.
So people take it for granted. They don't realize what an honor, what a blessing, what a privilege it is to like gather in community and to also read God's word, have the freedom to read God's word. A big one is just like the ease, the lure of easiness and comfort and convenience, because that's what the world kind of gravitates towards. Like technology especially is making everything just easier, more like instantaneous. And honestly, like the walk of faith is not easy and it's not instantaneous. It takes a lot of patience and endurance, and it's the long game. It's a long, lifelong journey. It has many ups and downs. It's not painless. So I think, oftentimes, especially more and more, we're kind of conditioned by a lot of things in society where we're like expecting things to be easy, to be fast, to be catered to us. And that's just not the way that like God tells us to live in terms of how we follow him. Jesus says to take up his cross and follow him, not take up your iPhone and filter for your preferences in terms of how to follow him.
Yeah, I remember when I was studying abroad in Hong Kong, and I just felt like there were so many people who love Jesus, and it's pretty obvious that they're Christians. And then when I came back to America, it was kind of like, yeah, like, okay. So I definitely, having lived abroad, I can see the difference.
Yeah.
But again, this is not about the mechanics. God's a loving father. It's not like a checklist of things that you do to say, hey, I am not a lukewarm Christian. But honestly, it's more of a heart and what you do with your faith.
Right.
Which we'll unpack later.
Yeah.
By the way, this is part 1 of 2. So this is there's a lot that we're gonna unpack here.
Yes.
And as we're talking, we just FYI, we might step on your toes, and that's totally okay. We are brothers and sisters, and our job is to call you up to higher levels than you already are. You are loved, and you are a beloved son and daughter of God. But just as your brothers and sisters, we are also gonna poke some holes.
Challenge, lovingly challenge. Yeah, going back to, the allure of comfort and convenience, a lot of us just want enough of God, just want a little bit of him, but not necessarily all of him, if we're honest with ourselves, because we don't want to sacrifice. We don't want to go through pain and challenge and hard things and trials that will refine us. If God tells us to do something difficult, like very rarely are we like, yay, let's go into difficulty. Like it takes intentional surrender and choice to do that. So I think a lot of us, just by human nature, we're like, oh, I want to avoid discomfort as much as possible. And so I just want enough of God, but not too much that it disrupts my life, my routines, my comfort, my goals. But in the Bible, it's like so clear that you cannot live this like half in, half out life. Matthew 6:24, Jesus says, no one can serve 2 masters. He's talking about God and mammon, the spirit of mammon, or like money. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. I remember when I first read this verse, I was like, what does this really mean? Like in the depths of my heart, I still felt like you can like do like multiple things. Like why is there only space for one? But it's really clear in the Bible that like we as human beings, God created us to only have that devotion to one God. And so that's why if God is not your God, it's pretty clear like you're idolizing something else as your God. It's kind of like in some organizations, I've had this before too, where you have like a dotted line manager, or like maybe 2 dotted line managers and like a direct manager, but then you're kind of confused because you're like, who do I go to for what? It's just not saying that doesn't work, but that's kind of a loose analogy of like we have so many dotted line managers in our lives and we're trying to include God in that mix, versus God is like, no, I'm your boss, I'm your manager, and everything else comes under me. For me, this definitely looked like, checking off all the boxes before I went all into following God. And I'll share more probably in the part 2. I'll share more like my personal journey about this. But when I was like first starting to learn about how to follow God, like what does it mean to be a Christian, like all this stuff, I remember being so guilty for like falling asleep at church. I would regularly fall asleep during worship like every week.
That's hard to imagine.
I think by the time this episode comes out, I'll have shared that story on my personal YouTube channel, because it's like black and white, like night versus day now. The first worship song at church, I'd be like, why is this so repetitive? I'm so bored. Can this be over? Like, can we just get to get to the message and like get out. I'm hungry. What's for lunch?
Worship songs are repetitive.
Yeah, yeah. And I was like, why do we keep singing the same thing? I was just so tired. I was also very sleep deprived. Versus now, I mean, Alex can attest. I'm like, yes, like, can we just stay here forever? I love worship. I love church. I love just marinating in God's presence. And it's just so different. But back then, it just looked like, oh, I have to go to church. I have to stand and clap and sing. It was so much like obligation, even though I didn't say it out loud. What did it look like for you, if you're willing to share?
I was gonna share in part 2.
Okay.
Yeah,
So stay tuned for part 2.
but I will say a sign that you are lukewarm, just being blunt, is the words that you say, like your talk.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, your internet search says a lot about you, like your search history. And a really good way to check your talk is just to ask your friends, like, what do I talk about? Like, what are some common themes that come up? For me, I have friends who just tell me. So
or you can just notice, like, when you're in conversations.
Like, I'm talking about my job a lot, or I'm talking a lot about money. I'm talking a lot about dating, relationships.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm complaining more, and maybe I have a heart of discontent. And so, honestly, your talk is representative of your heart.
Right.
And so,
that's good.
You can just tell. You can use your self-awareness to examine yourself and say, what's really springing up from my heart? I feel like there's all this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just a good way to check. And then, again, your internet search. I think that's pretty obvious. Like, what do you search for?
And the algorithm is pretty smart too. It reflects back to you what you engage with.
I know. It's
so just look at your feed and it'll
such a rabbit hole. It's such a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But I do want to talk about some signs of a lukewarm faith. On top of the words that you say and your internet search, number 1 is prioritizing comfort over conviction. And one big indicator is that we're more focused on staying comfortable than letting God challenge us. I feel like Christians should talk more about just the nuanced topics of life that actually impact us, like money, like sex, politics, pride, career, all of these things that are more taboo to talk about. I think we should really invite other people in and begin having those conversations. Not necessarily like in a worldly way, like, oh, how do I make more money, or how do I get promoted,
or like criticizing, gossiping.
But like just inviting people, like, hey, this is what I'm feeling. Am I wrong here? Like, what do you sense from the Lord about this situation? Anything, like, really invite feedback in.
And I think it starts with, I personally, when it comes to tough topics, I need to bring it to God first. Like, I need to invite God into it and be honest with myself about it. Because a lot of us just don't even want to touch tough topics, even with ourselves. Like, we're just like, just focus on work. Just focus on these things that need to get done. And we don't really have space in our lives and our minds to deal with difficult things. Especially, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, like emotions and messiness internally. Like, that's an example of something that I think God often wants us to bring to him and to process with him, but it does take the work and the time and the vulnerability, right? So I think it just starts with being honest with ourselves, with God, and really realizing like God is a safe space. We'll talk about conviction, but he's not here to condemn you, basically. He's here to help you process and navigate through tough things. And that helps you to grow and become a more like joyful, purposeful, life-filled person rather than bogged down by the weight and the narratives of the world.
Yeah. Just to get real, like a very recent personal example is one of the biggest strongholds in my life personally is money. And a lot of times, just like yesterday, I was sharing with Grace what I was marinating on. I'm also taking like a financial stewardship / talents course. It's called a talents course. That's taught in our church, but we're just talking about like stewardship and just everything that has to do with like calling and finance and all that stuff. And I was just sharing with Grace that even though we're more in a season of squeeze, definitely not like overabundance, but just like, it's just right. I felt like, oh man, I think God's leading me / us to give like above our means at at the end of the year to support certain causes that are more near and dear to God's heart, but also our heart as well. And so that
Yeah,
it's just
that's
an
good.
example. Like it's a hard conversation to have, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also much needed. So
Yeah,
that's an example of prioritizing conviction over comfort, and
yeah,
it's a conversation that needs to be had.
right.
Sign number two, in terms of lukewarm faith, is wanting feel good faith without depth.
Mm.
You want to talk about this actually?
Yeah. I think first of all, there's nothing wrong with like feel good things, temporarily or like once in a while. Like we're not saying don't watch a feel good movie or feel good video. Like I do that too, watching
Right,
movies
right.
and trailers and stuff that are funny. I think this is more about you just only gravitate towards things that will make you feel good, give you dopamine hits, like feel good about yourself. On the internet, for example, it's so easy to just follow people that kind of echo back to us already what we want to hear, hence the echo chambers, versus actually reading the Bible and being like, oh shoot, like this is like what Jesus says in Revelation 3:16, like he's gonna spit you out of his mouth if you're lukewarm. Like you don't really see that a lot on your social media feed, or at least I don't. So I think it's just being really aware, like, the voices that I'm listening to or that I'm surrounding myself by, is it only things that make me feel good about myself, or is it actually based on truth? Is it based on God's word? Is it based on the way that he calls us to live, and not just this like comfortable, or not even comfortable, but just like culturally accepted norm of like what to do and how to live? And like one example I think I'm just thinking is following influencers that promote, like just manifest what you want, and like the whole manifestation movement. But God never talks about manifesting in the Bible. And it's really about seeking God's will, like praying, giving him your desires, and surrendering it to him. Of course, you can have dreams that he's given you and visions, and ask him, like for clarity on that. But I think it's just there's so many things that are mixed into culture nowadays that it's so easy for us to fall into that trap of like, oh, everyone else is talking about this and it's not necessarily like a bad thing, so I'll just partake in it.
Yeah, that's really good. Matthew 22, verses 37 to 38 says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. So, this is not half-hearted love, but it's a commitment for our whole lives. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're all in with God. We're not like piecemealing things that we really like, oh yeah, that makes me feel better about myself, or that's good. And we just kind of take what we want, but then we got to look at like this whole book, this Bible,
Yeah.
and apply that to our lives. And it looks different for everyone. Like for one person, it could mean giving half of their wealth away. But for another person, it's not that. It could be like forgiving someone that hurt them. God just speaks to his individual children in different ways.
When you were talking, I was thinking of how like, protecting your energy, protecting your circle, like being selective with who you surround yourself with. Like we're not talking about that. Like that is actually really good and healthy in terms of who you're intentionally surrounding yourself by, and who you let into your inner circle, like what kind of things that you follow on social media. Like some things are not helpful and toxic. Like we're not saying, oh, just open yourself up to like anybody, like, but I think specifically in terms of lukewarm faith, that's what we're talking about, is like when you're following things that are just notice about yourself, what Alex was saying earlier, like the self-awareness piece. Are the things that you're following making you more lukewarm and like putting yourself at a distance from God? Or are the things that you're following and listening to and being influenced by actually pushing you closer to God, spurring you on towards him? And I think that's the main point I want to make. Not like, because I was just thinking like, oh, what about, wanting to protect your space and emotional, mental health and stuff like that, which is very important.
That's
I
good.
I fully endorse that.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Number three sign of being lukewarm is being passive rather than active in faith. This is hard for me, just honestly speaking. Like I can do all the right things. Like I can read my Bible, I can pray, but when God tells me to do something, many times I just delay it, or I don't do it at all. And it's hard. Like there are things that God asked me to do, and I think I do it more than I have more of an active faith, but I'm definitely not perfect. But this is definitely
I think you don't give yourself enough credit. I would say, from my opinion, I think you're way more active than most people.
Oh, thanks, babe.
But I guess because you are so active in faith, you can see how you want to be more active.
I'm a high achiever, and even I can go into this like checklist faith, which we'll actually talk about in part 2. I'm just saying this is hard, but the Bible says in James 1:22, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. That's super blunt. That's super straightforward.
Yeah.
Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Jesus isn't calling us to watch from the sidelines. He wants us to engage and participate in this work of faith. Personally speaking, this is most common in the area of finances. I think just God just speaks to me more in this area because it's honestly such a big stronghold in my family, and I think God really wants to break this poverty mindset, poverty mentality, poverty spirit, especially coming from I'm a child of immigrant parents, as many of you know who have been listening to this for a while. But honestly, the area of finances is super, super hard. Like generosity. I think I'm pretty good at managing money, like that aspect of it, but letting go part is super, super hard for me. For grace, it's not as hard, but in other things, in other areas, it's harder. There were many times where God just asked me to give away a certain amount or certain things in my life, and we don't have time to go through all of it. Actually, we do have time, because we have this podcast, and we can make
podcast.
this is not a service.
We want.
Oh my gosh, in tech work meetings, we always say that like, oh, we don't have time to go over this, but actually we do have time. So you're gonna get our full attention here. So specifically in the area of finances and how really God's inviting me into a more active versus passive faith. I remember the first time, this is so cool how the goodness of God works, and he just is so true to his word. The first time that I tithed, this was like 5 years into my walk. So 5 years into my walk, I haven't given anything. So there's hope for you, my friends. So I tithed for the first time, and it was super hard. Like, why am I wasting this money? Are they gonna use their money to like do things I don't want to? I don't want this money to be used for things I don't want. And so I had a lot of things in my mind, but I intentionally said, okay, hey God, I know you said this in your word. I'm just gonna do it. This is really hard. It's being super real with you. I did it. Pretty quickly after that, like a couple months after, his goodness of God just showed up. He provided a job that paid more, like 50% more than what I was making before. Grace and I got to move to the Bay Area and began our in-person relationship. So just honestly,
I feel like everything skyrocketed from there.
Yeah, honestly, things did skyrocket. Another example of him challenging me in finances, not that this is like a finance episode, but this is just how God challenges me in terms of active faith. In the beginning of our marriage, on our honeymoon, during like one of the mornings, I was in my quiet time, and I've been sensing this conviction for a while, but I think this morning kind of solidified it. I felt like God wanted me to give a lot of stocks away. I was really fixated on like some specific stocks, and I felt like I was idolizing that a bit. I was watching it a lot, and I just felt like God telling me, give that away. And I did. So we gave actually a lot. For me, it was enough to challenge me and stretch me. And so we did that. And pretty soon after that, like within 6 months, God blessed us with a small group that we got to lead and we love. And he even provided a better job and role for me in terms of the compensation, the culture, and the team. And then last example, it was pretty recent. This year, I decided that we're going to be faithful with giving in the extent that we can. And then literally the same month, we found out we were expecting a baby. And so it's just so crazy, the goodness of God that shows up in our lives when we really just obey, and he just loves to show off. I'm not saying that if you give, you're gonna get promoted or get a better job or have a baby or anything like that. But I'm just saying that there's opportunities to be more active in your faith, and God, as our loving Father, likes to have fun with us and show off.
Yeah. And there's so many more examples, but even in this season, like I'm constantly thinking of how grateful I am that we've been so blessed through other people's generosity too. And we've received gifts from like family and like friends and other local, especially like preparing for our baby coming soon. Like we are just, there's so many things, you can't see it right now on the video, but like we're surrounded by things that other moms have gifted from our local community and our church and everything. And I'm just like constantly reminded like God really is faithful and provides, like even when it doesn't come through like the financial provision that Alex was talking about. It doesn't look like what it used to look like necessarily through like a high paying job or living in the Bay on Bay Area salaries or whatnot. But God always provides through other means, if not just like the most unexpected ways. And I feel like that's just something I continually see in my life. Like it's the same pattern, it's the same theme every time I choose to trust God and surrender to Him and to go all in on something. Like He always responds in faithfulness and goodness and blessing in the most surprising ways that you can never conjure up yourself, you can never orchestrate or plan. It's so fun to like really experience God's goodness that way, because you're like, wow, he's really a loving father. He really loves us and takes care of us. But yeah, I think that's another episode to talk about, but I just wanted to like add on and confirm what Alex was saying, that I think so many of us, we're like, oh, well, trust God only if I can afford to like lose something. But that's not trust. Like real trust is going all in when, yeah, you could lose that thing that you're like holding on so tightly. But that's the exact reason why He wants you to trust Him with it, so that you're not holding onto it so tightly, and He can give you something even better. He can give you other things that will actually give you life. And He wants you to prioritize Him, not the gifts that He wants to give you. Okay,
So good.
that's a side tangent. But we also want to talk about, the danger of staying lukewarm is that it really just keeps us in this shallow place with God. It's like we're in a kiddie pool and God is like, there's a huge big pool with like fountains and lazy river and what are those things, the slides, water slides, and we're just like stuck in this like very shallow boring pool because we're like, oh, we're too scared to like venture to the other side. Or even like I would say God's love is more like the ocean. Like he is inviting us into this vast expansive ocean of love, of freedom, of peace, of joy, and we're just like on the shore like, I'm afraid to go out and like venture out there. But that's basically what we settle for when we're staying stagnant in lukewarm faith, checking off the boxes. Like we don't get to experience the depths of God's goodness. And a very real, talking about water examples, is like Peter walking on water. Like the disciples, only Peter stepped out of the boat when Jesus called him out and he saw Jesus on the water. Like Peter was actually like, I'll go and experience. Like if he hadn't stepped out of the boat, he would never have experienced walking on water. Like how crazy is that? But I think a lot of us kind of just stay in the boat and then we're like, I don't know, should I do it? And then we just never do it. And then we miss out on like the amazing things that we can access and experience and get to not just experience just for the sake of like, whoa, that was so cool, but like understand about who God is, who Jesus is, which fortifies and deepens and strengthens our relationship with Him. Like, there's so many things in the Gospels where the disciples grow in their faith. But I think for Peter, probably after walking on water with Jesus, he's like, oh dang, like this guy's legit. Like, like even more legit, than he had already been seeing and experiencing Him. But I don't think it's an accident that Peter is then chosen to be like the rock, the foundation of the church, because he was so devoted to Jesus. I think him stepping out in faith and experiencing the depths of Jesus's goodness, faithfulness, power, glory, just like built that even more deeper into him, if that makes sense. So it's like the more we take steps of faith, the more we experience God's faithfulness, the more we grow in our faith, and it's like a feedback loop.
Yeah, I tend to think of the quote, ships aren't made for the harbor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who said that, but
yeah.
I thought it was cool. Ships aren't made for the harbor. I can almost imagine like if you have a boat and you just put it in a harbor, it's safe, it's secure, you're shielded from storms for the most part. I'm not a boat expert, but if your boat is in the harbor, you as the owner if you don't venture out into the open ocean, you won't be able to see like the dolphins, the whales, the awesome waves, the vast ocean that's out there. You won't be able to snorkel. I just remember like in our honeymoon, we got to venture out into a boat. Even though I'm seasick, I still enjoyed it. But we got to see dolphins, we got to see sea turtles,
Yeah.
and what if that boat was just like in the harbor, just like chilling?
You
And
couldn't see
it's
those.
kind of like it's like that with our faith. Like if we're always in the harbor where it's safe, secure, it's stable, we don't get to experience even more of God, even more of his joy, even more of his pleasure,
Yeah.
and life in general. Like it's so much more fun to live a life of faith versus staying secure, safe. Nothing wrong with safety and security. I think we all as humans want safety and security, but there are amazing things waiting for you on the other side if you act in obedience and take your faith seriously.
Yeah, so well said. We do have a last like challenging question that you can reflect on and really take away with you from this episode. But before we get into that, we do want to share something really exciting that we've been working on for a really long time behind the scenes. Later this week, we are going to share about a secret project we've been working on to help people who feel like you are stuck in cycles of overwork, overwhelm, and chronic anxiety, chronic stress when it comes to work. We're really passionate about this because, again, like tying it back to lukewarm Christianity, a lot of our lukewarmness actually, I feel like, also comes from just being so stuck in these fears, these anxieties that keep us focused on the wrong things. So God, he's calling us to experience him in amazing ways and to be his ambassadors, to make disciples of all nations, of our workplaces, being lights in our work, because both of us, have had very significant journeys in terms of trying to like navigate, like, how do I not be a lukewarm Christian, especially at work, because that's where we spend a lot of our time. Like, how do I be a burning bright light for God when it comes to my work? But it's so hard to do that, honestly, when you're bogged down by the stress, overwhelm, overwork, and all that stuff. So part of why we love doing this and teaching people how to break free from these cycles of stress from work is because it's really part of the Great Commission. Like, in order to be like a bright light, we have to be free ourselves, authentic to who we are, authentic to what God has called us to be and to do. We are working on something and it's going to be released this week. So if you haven't yet, make sure you join our email list to get the info. You can go to withthetrans.com/email and get the details there.
Yes, again, it's withthetrans.com/email.
Yes.
Just wanted to do a slow-mo version. Just some closing thoughts and challenges. I want you to think of, are there any areas where you might be settling for comfort in your faith? It could be relationships, finances, career, etc. That's totally up to you, but I feel like you actually know the answer to that question more than you realize.
Yeah, ask God what he wants you to do, because I think sometimes it's easy to be like, oh, I just want to like fix this issue right away, and then it becomes a performance thing, or it might not, but it could become a performance thing of like, oh, I just want to get rid of this problem, so I'll just like do XYZ and like prove to God how good I am. But I think personally the best thing is just to start having an honest conversation with God about it. Like, God, like, I know this area of my life is a stronghold, or this area of my life I tend to be lukewarm, or I don't want to face. Like, what do you say about it? And really just like lean in to it with him. You can also start learning like through resources, like what does the Bible say about this? What do other pastors, what are messages about it? What read books about it? Like learn more and try not to. I think it's easy for us to shy away when we're like, oh, it's going to be uncomfortable, but I think the biggest thing is just to be curious and to let God lead you in that journey.
That's so good. And make sure to subscribe wherever you are listening or watching, because you don't want to miss part 2. We're going to get into practical ways to live an all-in faith, plus what to do during seasons when you just feel dry. You just feel like, I don't really feel God. We're going to unpack all of that and all the practicals, but please subscribe and we'll see you next time.
See you then. We are so grateful you joined us for this conversation. We hope it encouraged you and spoke to you. And we would love to invite you, if you haven't yet, to join our free email newsletter, because that's the best way not just to know about our new episodes, but also super exciting new resources that we're working on behind the scenes that we cannot wait to get into your hands, and you will be the first to know and get access to. So make sure to join our newsletter at withthetrans.com/email, or you can go to link in the description below, and we'll see you in the next one.